Thunder crashed in the distance as Quentin Baxter rode hard through the open plains of Watsonville, California, his heart pounding against his ribs with every hoofbeat. The year was 1875, and the man who'd stolen his daughter 3 days ago had a half-day head start. Quentin's eyes burned from lack of sleep, scanning the horizon with desperate intensity as his trusted stallion, Midnight, galloped beneath him. The trail had gone cold twice already. If not for the kindness of a stagecoach driver who'd spotted a man with a small child heading west yesterday morning, Quentin might have lost hope entirely. His wife had been dead these past 2 years, leaving little Amelia as his only family in this harsh world. She was just 5 years old, too young to understand why someone would take her from her bed while Quentin checked the perimeter of their modest ranch one fateful night. "Hold on, Amelia," he muttered through clenched teeth, the wind whipping his words away. "Your pa's coming." Quentin was no stranger to hardship. At 32, he'd fought in the war, worked cattle drives across 3 states, and built his small ranch with nothing but determination and calloused hands. Yet nothing had prepared him for the hollow ache of his daughter's empty bedroom, or the rage that consumed him with every passing hour. As the afternoon sun began its descent, Quentin spotted a thin trail of smoke rising from a cluster of cottonwoods nestled alongside a creek bed. He slowed Midnight to a walk, drawing his Winchester rifle from its scabbard. Approaching cautiously, he dismounted some distance away, securing his horse to a scrub oak before continuing on foot. The smoke originated from a small campfire, and as Quentin crept closer, his heart nearly stopped. A woman sat beside the fire, her back against a fallen log, and in her lap lay Amelia, sound asleep. The woman's hand gently stroked his daughter's hair, her face a picture of tender concern. Quentin raised his rifle, ready to demand answers when something unexpected happened. At the sight of his daughter peacefully sleeping in the stranger's protective embrace, a peculiar sensation washed over him, recognition and warmth, as though he'd found something he hadn't known was missing. His heart thumped a strange rhythm that his mind couldn't yet comprehend. Pushing the feeling aside, he stepped into the clearing, rifle raised. "Don't move," he commanded, his voice low and dangerous. The woman's head snapped up, her eyes widening with shock rather than guilt. She instinctively tightened her hold on Amelia, who stirred slightly but didn't wake. "Please," the woman whispered urgently. "You'll wake her. She's only just fallen asleep after crying for hours." Quentin's finger hovered over the trigger. "That's my daughter you're holding, madam. Where's the man who took her?" The woman's face hardened. "If you mean Jasper Reed, he's tied to a tree about 50 yards north of here." She nodded in that direction. "I found him trying to sell your daughter to a family passing through in a wagon. Said he was her uncle and her pa was dead." Quentin's blood ran cold. "And you just happened to intervene." "I recognized a lie when I heard one," she replied evenly. "The little girl was terrified of him, kept saying she wanted her papa. That was enough for me." For the first time, Quentin noticed the bruising on the woman's jaw. He didn't go willingly, I take it. A ghost of a smile crossed her lips. "No, he did not." Quentin lowered his rifle slightly, confusion replacing some of his anger. "Who are you?" "Felicity Zimmerman," she answered. "I was heading to San Francisco when I came across them." Amelia stirred then, her eyes fluttering open. Upon seeing Quentin, she cried out with joy. "Papa!" She scrambled from Felicity's lap and ran to him. Quentin dropped to one knee, gathering his daughter in his arms, rifle forgotten on the ground. Tears he'd been holding back for days finally broke free as he held his child close. "Amelia, my sweet girl, are you hurt? Did he harm you?" "No, Papa. Miss Felicity saved me," Amelia said, her small voice solemn. "The bad man said you were dead, but I knew it wasn't true." Quentin looked up at Felicity, who now stood watching their reunion with misty eyes. He noticed for the first time that she was dressed practically in riding clothes, a pistol holstered at her hip. Her chestnut hair was pulled back in a simple braid, and despite the bruise on her jaw, there was a natural beauty to her that caught him off guard. "I owe you a debt I can never repay, Miss Zimmerman," he said, his voice thick with emotion. Felicity shook her head. "Anyone would have done the same." "No," Quentin replied firmly. "They wouldn't have. Most would have looked the other way." He glanced toward where she'd indicated Reed was tied up. "I need to deal with him." "The sheriff in Clearwater is expecting him," Felicity said. "I sent word with a passing rider yesterday that I'd bring him in. Town's about 3 hours' ride from here." Quentin studied her with newfound respect. "You planned this out." "I couldn't very well leave a child kidnapper free to try again," she replied with a shrug. "And I couldn't leave your daughter alone to go after help." "Papa, I'm hungry," Amelia said, tugging at his vest. "Miss Felicity made rabbit stew," the child added hopefully. Quentin looked at the pot simmering over the fire, then back at Felicity. "Seems we have much to discuss over dinner if you're willing to share." Felicity nodded, a hesitant smile forming. "There's plenty." As they sat around the campfire, Amelia nestled between them. Quentin couldn't shake the strange feeling that had overcome him when he first saw Felicity with his daughter. His heart seemed to recognize something his mind hadn't yet grasped, something important about this strong, compassionate woman who'd risked herself to save a child she didn't know. After dinner, with Amelia once again asleep, this time in a bedroll by the fire, Quentin and Felicity spoke in low voices. She told him she was 26, widowed after a brief marriage to a man who died in a mining accident 3 years prior. She'd been a schoolteacher back east before deciding to start fresh in California. "I sold everything and bought passage west," she explained. "I've a cousin in San Francisco who's offered me a place to stay until I find work." "And yet you delayed your journey to rescue my daughter," Quentin observed, studying her face in the firelight. Felicity looked down at her hands. "Some things matter more than plans." The next morning, they rode together to Clearwater, Amelia sitting in front of Quentin while Felicity led her horse with Reed bound and scowling atop it. The sheriff took Reed into custody with promises of a swift trial, and the testimonies of Quentin, Felicity, and even little Amelia ensured justice would be served. As they stood outside the sheriff's office, an awkward silence fell between them. "I suppose this is where we part ways," Felicity said finally, glancing toward the stage-coach office down the street. Quentin cleared his throat. "Actually, Miss Zimmerman, I was hoping you might consider a change in plans." She raised an eyebrow. "Oh. Our ranch is hardly grand, but it's about a day's ride from here. You saved my daughter's life. The least I can offer is a proper meal, a comfortable bed for a few nights, and payment for your trouble." "I didn't do it for payment, Mr. Baxter," she replied, a hint of offense in her tone. "Quentin," he corrected gently. "And I know you didn't, but winter's coming and the mountain passes to San Francisco will be dangerous soon. You could stay until spring if you wanted. Amelia's taken a shine to you and we could use the help." Felicity hesitated, looking down at Amelia, who was clinging to her hand. "What kind of help?" "Amelia hasn't had a woman's influence since her mother passed," Quentin explained. "And I've been meaning to hire a tutor for her. It seems Providence might have sent one our way." A small smile played at Felicity's lips. "A temporary arrangement, then, for as long as it suits you," Quentin agreed, ignoring the strange flutter in his chest that hoped it might be longer than temporary. "Very well," Felicity nodded. "Until spring." Little did either know that spring would come and go, and Felicity would find reasons to stay, reasons that began with a child's education, but soon encompassed much more. The journey back to Quentin's ranch took longer than expected. A sudden autumn storm forced them to seek shelter in an abandoned line shack for a night, and they had to go slowly with Amelia riding double. By the time they crested the final hill overlooking the Baxter property, the sun was setting on their second day of travel. Felicity reined in her horse beside Quentin's, taking in the modest spread below. A sturdy log house sat nestled against a backdrop of pine trees, with a barn, corral, and a few outbuildings nearby. A small creek wound through the property, and a herd of perhaps 30 cattle grazed in a meadow beyond. "It's not much compared to some," Quentin said, a note of apology in his voice. "It's beautiful," Felicity replied sincerely. "You built all this yourself," Quentin nodded. "With some help from neighbors when it came to raising the barn. Started with nothing but the land 5 years ago." Amelia, sitting in front of Quentin, twisted around to look up at him. "Can Miss Felicity stay in Mama's sewing room, Papa?" A shadow crossed Quentin's face. "If that's agreeable to Miss Zimmerman, yes." As they rode down to the house, Felicity noticed signs of a place maintained by a man alone, the garden overgrown with weeds, mending piled on the porch, a broken window patched with canvas. Yet the livestock looked healthy, the fence line strong, and the house itself solid and well built. This was a man who prioritized what needed to be done, even if some things fell by the wayside. Quentin's foreman, an older man named Hank Davis, greeted them with relief, having been frantic with worry since discovering Amelia missing. His weathered face broke into a wide smile upon seeing the child safe, and he listened with growing astonishment as Quentin briefly explained Felicity's role in her rescue. "Miss Zimmerman will be staying with us through the winter, possibly longer," Quentin concluded. "She'll be tutoring Amelia and helping around the house." Hank tipped his hat to Felicity. "We're mighty glad to have you, madam, especially after what you did for little Miss Amelia." That night, after a simple supper of beans and cornbread, which Quentin apologized for repeatedly, Felicity was shown to her room, a small chamber that had once been Sarah Baxter's sewing room. It contained a narrow bed, a chest of drawers, and a small desk beneath a window overlooking the creek. Someone, likely Hank, had hastily cleaned and aired the space, but Felicity could see it had been used for storage for some time. "It's not much," Quentin said from the doorway, echoing his earlier words. Felicity set her carpet bag on the bed. "It's perfect, truly. I've slept in far worse places during my journey west," he lingered, seeming uncertain. "I realize I've brought you here without discussing terms. For your teaching and help, I can offer room, board, and $15 a month. Is that fair?" The sum was generous for the arrangement, and Felicity knew it. "More than fair, Mr. Baxter, Quentin," he reminded her again. "And if there's anything you need, please don't hesitate to ask." That night, lying in bed listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the ranch, Felicity wondered at the strange turn her life had taken. She'd left Pennsylvania seeking a fresh start, never imagining she'd end up on a cattle ranch teaching a motherless child. Yet something about this place, these people, felt right in a way she couldn't explain. The weeks that followed fell into a rhythm. Mornings were devoted to Amelia's lessons, which Felicity conducted at the kitchen table. The girl was bright and eager to learn, soaking up reading, arithmetic, and history with enthusiasm. Afternoons found Felicity helping with household tasks, mending clothes, preserving the last of the garden's produce for winter, and gradually bringing order to the home that had clearly lacked a woman's touch. Quentin was often busy with ranch work, especially as they prepared for winter, but he made time each evening to listen to Amelia read from her primer and share stories of his day with both of them. Felicity noticed how his eyes lingered on her sometimes when he thought she wasn't looking, confusion and something warmer in his gaze. For her part, Felicity found herself watching him too, the gentle way he spoke to his daughter, his strong hands carefully mending a bridle by lamplight, the rare smile that transformed his serious face when Amelia said something clever. As October gave way to November and the first snow dusted the mountains, Felicity and Quentin settled into an easy companionship. They would talk late into the evening after Amelia was asleep, sharing stories of their pasts and hopes for the future. She learned he'd come west after the war, unable to return to a Tennessee home destroyed by conflict. He discovered she'd always longed to see the Pacific Ocean and had a gift for sketching wildlife she observed around the ranch. It was during one such evening, as they sat before the fire drinking coffee, that Quentin finally asked the question that had clearly been on his mind. "Why did you really stop to help Amelia that day? The truth now." Felicity stared into the flames, gathering her thoughts. "My sister was taken when I was 12 and she was 8, she said finally. "Not by a stranger, by our mother's brother after our parents died. He claimed he was giving her a better home, but he sold her to a family heading west who wanted a child to work their farm." She took a steadying breath. "I never saw her again." Quentin's face softened. "I'm sorry. When I saw Jasper with Amelia, something in her eyes reminded me of my sister, that same fear, that silent pleading." Felicity's fingers tightened around her cup. "I couldn't stand by and let history repeat itself." Quentin reached across the space between them, his hand covering hers. "Thank God you didn't." That touch, simple as it was, sent warmth spreading through Felicity's arm and into her chest. Their eyes met across the firelight, and for a long moment neither spoke. The spell was broken by a log collapsing in the fireplace, sending up a shower of sparks. Quentin withdrew his hand, clearing his throat. "It's getting late." "Yes," Felicity agreed, rising from her chair. "Good night, Quentin." "Good night, Felicity." As she lay in bed that night, Felicity acknowledged to herself what she'd been trying to ignore. She was developing feelings for Quentin Baxter. Feelings that went beyond gratitude for his hospitality or appreciation of his kindness toward her. Feelings that both thrilled and terrified her, for she had no idea if they could ever be reciprocated. What she didn't know was that Quentin lay awake in his own bed, wrestling with similar thoughts, and the strange prescience his heart had shown that day at the creek. December brought heavy snows that isolated the ranch for days at a time. Confined indoors, the three of them grew closer still. Felicity taught Amelia to knit, using yarn unraveled from an old sweater. Quentin read aloud from a dog-eared copy of Robinson Crusoe in the evenings. They played checkers, told stories, and sang songs from their childhoods. On Christmas Eve, Quentin surprised Felicity by presenting her with a small wooden box he'd carved himself, decorated with delicate pine branches and birds. Inside was a silver thimble that had belonged to his mother. "It's beautiful," she whispered, running her fingers over the intricate carving. "You've brought life back to this house," he said quietly. "It's a poor thanks, but it's heartfelt." Felicity had made gifts too, a rag doll for Amelia sewn from scraps, and for Quentin, a sketch of him and Amelia sitting together on the porch, their faces turned toward each other in laughter. He stared at it for a long moment before carefully placing it on the mantel. "No one's ever captured her smile so perfectly," he said, his voice thick with emotion. As winter's grip held tight through January, Felicity became ever more integrated into their lives. She no longer felt like a guest or employee, but an essential part of the household. Quentin began consulting her on decisions about the ranch, valuing her practical nature and clear thinking. Amelia took to calling her Miss Felicity, with such affection that it nearly brought tears to her eyes. Yet neither she nor Quentin acted on the growing attraction between them. There were moments hands touching as they passed dishes at dinner, lingering glances across the room, conversations that flowed so naturally they lost track of time, but always one or both of them pulled back, as though afraid to disrupt the harmony they'd achieved. It was Amelia who finally forced the issue, in the innocent way that only children can. One snowy afternoon in February, as they sat near the fire, the little girl looked up from her drawing and announced, "Papa, why don't you marry Miss Felicity? Then she could be my new mama and stay forever." The silence that followed was deafening. Felicity felt her cheeks burn as she stared fixedly at her mending. Quentin coughed, clearly searching for an appropriate response. "That's not how it works, sweetheart," he finally managed. "Marriage is complicated." Amelia frowned. "But you like each other. I see you looking at Miss Felicity the same way you used to look at Mama in the photograph, and Miss Felicity smiles different at you than at anybody else." Felicity stood abruptly, nearly upending her sewing basket. "I should check on dinner." She fled to the kitchen, heart pounding, unsure whether to be mortified or secretly pleased that her feelings hadn't gone entirely unnoticed. She busied herself stirring the stew, trying to calm her racing thoughts. Moments later, she heard Quentin's footsteps behind her. "Felicity," he said quietly. She turned reluctantly, unable to meet his eyes. "Children say the strangest things. They also sometimes see clearer than adults," he replied, taking a step closer. "Amelia's right about one thing. I do look at you differently." Felicity's heart skipped a beat. "Quentin, let me finish," he said gently. "When I found you with Amelia that day, something happened that I can't explain. My heart seemed to recognize you before my mind could make sense of who you were. I've been trying to understand it ever since." He moved closer still, close enough that she could see the flecks of gold in his hazel eyes. "I've come to care for you, Felicity, more than I thought possible after Sarah died, but I need to know if there's any chance you might someday feel the same." Felicity swallowed hard, gathering her courage. "I already do," she whispered. Relief and joy transformed his face. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, Quentin leaned in and kissed her. It was gentle, almost hesitant, but it sent a flood of warmth through Felicity that chased away the February chill. When they parted, Quentin's smile was tentative. "I'm not asking for promises now, just time for us to see where this might lead." Felicity nodded, her own smile growing. "I'd like that very much." From the doorway came a small giggle. They turned to find Amelia watching them, hands clapped over her mouth in delight. "Does this mean Miss Felicity is staying?" she asked hopefully. Quentin and Felicity exchanged glances, both unable to stop smiling. "For now," Felicity answered. "I'm not going anywhere." Spring came early that year, the snow melting to reveal tender green shoots pushing through the earth. As the world around them renewed itself, so too did the relationships on the Baxter ranch. Quentin and Felicity's courtship progressed with the changing season, cautious at first, then blooming with increasing confidence. They were careful to maintain propriety, mindful of Amelia's watchful eyes and the gossip that could spread in small communities. Yet there were stolen kisses in the barn, long walks by the creek holding hands, and conversations that lasted until the fire burned low, revealing their hopes, fears, and dreams to one another. Felicity learned that beneath Quentin's serious exterior lay a man of deep feeling and unexpected humor. He discovered her strength went far beyond the physical courage she'd shown rescuing Amelia. She possessed a resilient spirit that had weathered loss and disappointment without becoming brittle. In April, when the mountain passes cleared, Felicity received a letter from her cousin in San Francisco. inquiring whether she still intended to come west. She sat with the letter in her lap for a long time, watching through the window as Quentin taught Amelia to ride her new pony in the corral. That evening, after Amelia was asleep, she showed Quentin the letter. "You never did make it to San Francisco," he observed, returning it to her after reading. "No," she agreed. "Life had other plans." Quentin took her hands in his. "What do you want to do, Felicity?" She met his gaze steadily. "I made a promise to my cousin, but my heart is here now, with you and Amelia." Relief washed over his face. "I was afraid you might feel obligated to continue your journey." "My journey brought me exactly where I needed to be," she replied softly. "I just didn't know it at the time." Quentin reached into his pocket and withdrew a simple gold band. "I've been carrying this for weeks, waiting for the right moment. I can't offer you wealth or luxury, Felicity, but I can promise to love you every day for the rest of my life. Will you marry me?" Tears filled Felicity's eyes. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, with all my heart." Their wedding took place in June, a small affair at the Watsonville church with a handful of neighboring ranchers and their families in attendance. Amelia served as flower girl, proudly scattering rose petals before Felicity as she walked down the aisle in a blue dress she'd sewn herself, carrying wildflowers gathered that morning. The reception was held at the ranch, with tables set up under the cottonwoods and lanterns hanging from the branches. There was music from a fiddle and harmonica, dancing on a wooden platform Quentin and his men had built for the occasion, and enough food to feed twice their number, contributed by neighbors who had come to respect the schoolteacher who'd saved little Amelia Baxter. As twilight fell, Quentin pulled his bride away from the celebration for a moment alone. "Happy, Mrs. Baxter?" he asked, his arms encircling her waist. "Completely," she replied, leaning into his embrace. "Though I still can't quite believe how much my life has changed in less than a year." "For the better, I hope," Quentin murmured against her hair. "Beyond anything I could have imagined," Felicity assured him, turning in his arms to face him. "When I left Pennsylvania, I was seeking a new beginning, but I never dreamed I'd find a family." Later that night, after the guests had departed and Amelia was asleep in her bed, exhausted from excitement, Quentin carried Felicity across the threshold of the bedroom they would now share. Their coming together as husband and wife was tender and passionate, the culmination of months of growing love and trust. Afterward, lying in Quentin's arms as moonlight streamed through the window, Felicity reflected on the strange twist of fate that had brought them together. "Do you ever think about that day at the creek?" she asked softly. "How different things might have been if I hadn't happened along when I did." Quentin's arms tightened around her. "I try not to. The thought of losing Amelia." He shuddered. "But I do think about seeing you there with her sleeping in your lap. Something inside me just knew." "Knew what?" Felicity prompted, curious. "That you belonged with us," he answered simply. "My heart recognized you before my mind could make sense of it." The summer months passed in a haze of happiness as they adjusted to life as a family. Felicity took to ranching life with determination, learning to ride better, helping with the garden, and even assisting with the cattle when an extra hand was needed. Quentin marveled at her adaptability and the natural way she'd slipped into the role of wife and mother. Amelia blossomed under their combined care, excelling in her studies and growing more confident each day. She took to calling Felicity Mama without prompting, the first time bringing tears to both adults' eyes. In August, Felicity discovered she was expecting a child of her own. She told Quentin one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Amelia already in bed. His face registered shock, then wonder, then pure joy as he gathered her into his arms. "A baby," he whispered against her hair. "Our baby." Felicity nodded, her own happiness tinged with nervousness. "Are you pleased?" Quentin laughed, lifting her off her feet in an uncharacteristic display of exuberance. "Felicity, you've already given me back my daughter and made me happier than I ever thought possible. Now you're giving us a child together. Please doesn't begin to cover it." The news of the coming baby cemented Felicity's place in the community. The wives of neighboring ranchers, who had been friendly but somewhat reserved with the Eastern schoolteacher, now fully embraced her, sharing advice, hand-me-down baby clothes, and the special camaraderie of women who understood the challenges of bearing children far from doctors and modern conveniences. As her body changed with the growing child, Quentin became even more protective and attentive. He insisted on hiring a local girl, Maria Espinoza, to help with household chores and look after Amelia when Felicity needed rest. He built a cradle from pine harvested on their land, carving it with the same careful detail he'd put into Felicity's Christmas gift. "You're going to spoil me," Felicity protested one evening as he rubbed her aching feet after a long day. "You deserve spoiling," he replied simply. "And I have years to make up for." Felicity tilted her head. "What do you mean?" Quentin's hands stilled on her feet. "After Sarah died, I was lost in grief for a long time. I did what needed doing for Amelia's sake, but I was half alive at best." His eyes met hers, vulnerability plain in them. "You brought me back to life, Felicity. You made me want to be more than just a provider. You helped me remember how to love." Tears welled in Felicity's eyes. "Oh, Quentin." "So yes," he continued, resuming his gentle massage, "I plan to spoil you for the rest of our days together. It's the least I can do." Winter came again, harsher than the previous year, with blizzards that isolated the ranch for weeks at a time. Felicity's pregnancy progressed without complication, though her size in the later months prompted good-natured teasing from Quentin about the possibility of twins. "Don't even joke," Felicity warned him after a particularly restless night. "This one feels quite large enough, thank you." The baby came during a late March snowstorm, 2 weeks earlier than expected. Quentin had to ride through the storm to fetch Mrs. Torres, an experienced midwife from a neighboring ranch, while Maria stayed with Felicity and Amelia. The labor was difficult and long. Felicity, who had faced danger and hardship without flinching, found herself humbled by the intensity of bringing new life into the world. For 18 hours she labored, Quentin never leaving her side except when propriety demanded it, his face growing more concerned as her strength began to flag. "You can do this, my love," he encouraged, wiping her brow with a cool cloth. "You're the strongest woman I know." Just before dawn, with one final tremendous effort, Felicity gave birth to a healthy son. The first cry of their child brought fresh tears to both parents' eyes. Mrs. Torres cleaned and swaddled the infant before placing him in Felicity's trembling arms. "He's perfect," Quentin whispered, perched on the edge of the bed, one arm around his exhausted wife, the other hand gently touching his son's tiny fingers. "He has your chin," Felicity observed with a tired smile, "and your serious expression." They named him Samuel, after Felicity's father, with Quentin as his middle name. Amelia was enchanted with her baby brother, insisting on helping with his care at every opportunity and proudly telling anyone who would listen that she was a big sister now. As spring bloomed into summer once more, the Baxter family settled into their new rhythm. Samuel proved to be a contented baby, bringing joy to everyone on the ranch. Quentin would often carry him in a sling while checking fences or tending livestock, proudly showing him the land that would one day be his legacy. Felicity resumed teaching Amelia, now incorporating caring for Samuel into the daily lessons about responsibility and family. On warm afternoons, they would spread a quilt beneath the cottonwoods by the creek, Felicity reading aloud while Amelia played nearby, and Samuel slept in a basket beside them. It was during one such afternoon, with Samuel almost 4 months old, that Quentin returned early from a trip to town with unexpected news. "The railroad's coming through," he announced, dismounting and joining them on the quilt. He kissed Felicity in greeting, then picked up his son, who gurgled happily at the sight of his father. "Through Watsonville?" Felicity asked, marking her place in the book. Quentin nodded. "They're laying track from Sacramento all the way to the coast. Should reach here by next year." He bounced Samuel gently in his arms. "It's going to change everything. For better or worse?" Felicity prompted, recognizing the conflicted expression on her husband's face. "Both, I expect," he replied thoughtfully. "It'll be easier to get cattle to market, bring in supplies. But it'll also mean more people, more development." "The changing West," Felicity mused. "My father used to say progress never asks permission." "Wise man," Quentin agreed. He looked around at their peaceful setting, the babbling creek, the meadow beyond dotted with wildflowers, the mountains rising in the distance. "I just hope we can preserve what matters most." "We will," Felicity assured him, taking his free hand in hers. "Together." That evening, after the children were asleep, Quentin and Felicity sat on the porch swing, enjoying the cool night air. Fireflies danced in the yard, their intermittent glow like earthbound stars. "I've been thinking," Quentin said, his arm around his wife's shoulders. "With the railroad coming, land values are going to rise. Might be a good time to expand the ranch if we can." Felicity considered this. "The Wilcox property to the east," Quentin nodded, impressed as always by her quick understanding. "Old man Wilcox is talking about moving to Oregon to live with his daughter. No sons to take over. It would nearly double our grazing land." "Can we afford it?" Felicity asked practically. "With the money we've saved and a small loan from the bank, yes," Quentin replied. "But it would mean tighter times for a while. I wanted your thoughts before deciding." Felicity leaned her head against his shoulder. "I think it's a good investment in our future and the children's future. Samuel will need his own stake someday, and who knows, we might have more children to provide for." Quentin's arm tightened around her. "More children, HM? You're not trying to tell me something," she laughed, elbowing him gently. "No, not yet, but someday perhaps." "I like the sound of that," he murmured, kissing the top of her head. "Our family growing alongside the ranch." The next year brought the promised railroad, changing Watsonville from a sleepy cattle town to a bustling transportation hub. As Quentin had predicted, it brought both benefits and challenges. The Baxters' beef commanded better prices with easier access to urban markets, but they also faced increased competition from larger operations moving into the area. Quentin's foresight in purchasing the Wilcox land proved wise. As California's population swelled with new arrivals, good grazing land became increasingly scarce and valuable. What had seemed an expensive investment soon looked like a bargain. Felicity, ever practical, suggested diversifying their operation. "What about planting some of the valley land in wheat or corn? The new flour mill in town needs steady suppliers." Quentin initially resisted, seeing himself primarily as a cattleman, but Felicity's gentle persistence and sound reasoning eventually won him over. By their third year of marriage, the Baxter Ranch produced not only quality beef, but also grain and a small apple orchard that Felicity had planted with varieties brought from back east. Their family grew as well. When Samuel was 2, Felicity gave birth to twin girls, Elizabeth and Catherine, challenging even Mrs. Torres's considerable midwifery skills, but ultimately adding double the joy to their household. Amelia, now 9, took her role as big sister seriously, helping care for her siblings with maternal pride. Through it all, the bond between Quentin and Felicity deepened. The instant recognition he'd felt that day by the creek had blossomed into a partnership of equals, built on mutual respect, shared goals, and an abiding love that weathered the inevitable storms of ranch life. One evening, as they sat on the expanded porch of their home, now a proper 2-story farmhouse that Quentin had built with the help of hired hands, watching their 4 children play in the yard, Quentin reflected on the journey that had brought them here. "Do you ever wonder what might have happened if Amelia hadn't been taken that day?" he asked, voicing a thought that occasionally still troubled him. "It's terrible to think something so awful led to so much happiness." Felicity considered his question carefully before answering. "I believe some people are meant to find each other," she said finally. "If not that way, then another." She turned to look at him, her eyes reflecting the golden light of sunset. "But I'm grateful every day that I was in the right place at the right time." "As am I," Quentin agreed, squeezing her hand. "Though sometimes I think you finding Amelia wasn't chance at all, but providence." "Perhaps," Felicity smiled. "Or perhaps it was simply that your heart knew before your mind knew that I was the one you'd been waiting for without realizing it." "The heart is wiser than we give it credit for," Quentin mused, watching as Amelia helped little Elizabeth up after a tumble, brushing off her dress with sisterly care. That night, lying in bed with Felicity curled against him, Quentin thought about how completely his life had transformed in the 5 years since that desperate ride to find his kidnapped daughter. From a grieving widower barely holding things together to a contented husband and father, his days filled with purpose and his nights with peace. "What are you thinking about?" Felicity murmured sleepily against his chest. "Just counting my blessings," he replied, stroking her hair. "And they're too numerous to finish before dawn," she chuckled softly. "Then perhaps you should save some for tomorrow." "I'll have new ones by then," he assured her, kissing her forehead. "I discover more every day." The years passed, bringing changes to the Baxter family and their corner of California. The railroad town of Watsonville grew into a proper city, with brick buildings replacing wooden structures, electric lights gradually appearing on main streets, and automobiles eventually joining horses as means of transportation. The Baxter Ranch prospered under Quentin and Felicity's joint management, expanding to include more land, more cattle, and eventually more modern equipment. They were among the first in the area to install indoor plumbing and a telephone, much to the children's fascination. Amelia grew into a beautiful young woman with her father's quiet strength and her stepmother's love of learning. At 18, she left for a women's college in San Francisco, the same journey Felicity had once intended to make, but never completed. The parting was bittersweet, but both Quentin and Felicity took pride in raising a daughter confident enough to seek her own path. Samuel followed in his father's footsteps, showing a natural affinity for ranching from an early age. By 16, he could ride, rope, and manage cattle as well as most grown men, yet he also inherited Felicity's intellectual curiosity, devouring books on agricultural science and business management. The twins, spirited and inseparable, brought constant activity and laughter to the household. Elizabeth demonstrated artistic talent like her mother, while Catherine revealed a head for numbers that would later serve the ranch well. When Felicity was 39, she surprised everyone, including herself, by becoming pregnant once more. Despite concerns about her age, she delivered a healthy boy they named David, who became the unexpected joy of their middle years. Through 2 decades of marriage, Quentin and Felicity faced their share of hardships, drought years that threatened the ranch, illness that nearly took Elizabeth at age 10, economic downturns that required careful management to weather. Yet they faced each challenge together, their partnership only strengthening with each obstacle overcome. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Quentin surprised Felicity with a trip to San Francisco, the destination she'd never reached. They spent a week exploring the city, visiting Amelia, who was now teaching at her alma mater, and finally standing together at the edge of the Pacific Ocean. As they watched the sunset over the water, Quentin wrapped his arms around his wife from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. "Was it worth the wait?" he asked. Felicity leaned back against him, savoring the moment. "Everything has been," she replied softly, "but it's not the ocean that matters, it's sharing it with you." That night, in their hotel room with a view of the bay, they made love with the tenderness and familiarity of long-married partners who still found wonder in each other. Afterward, Felicity propped herself up on one elbow, studying her husband's face in the moonlight. "What?" Quentin asked, smiling up at her. "I was just thinking about that day by the creek," she said. "How frightened I was when you appeared with your rifle and how confused when you lowered it." "I was pretty confused myself," Quentin admitted with a chuckle. "There I was, ready to shoot first and ask questions later, and instead I found myself staring at the most beautiful woman I'd ever seen, holding my daughter as if she'd always belonged there." "Your heart knew," Felicity reminded him, brushing a strand of silver-threaded hair from his forehead. "It did," he agreed, pulling her down for another kiss. "And it's been right about you every day since." As they returned to the ranch, to the children and grandchildren awaiting them, Quentin reflected on the strange, winding path that had led to this full and satisfying life. A kidnapping, a chance encounter, a moment of recognition that defied rational explanation, all leading to a love that had sustained and nourished them both for 2 decades. In the years that followed, as they watched their children grow into adults with families of their own, as the ranch passed into Samuel's capable hands with the twins assisting in its management, as they welcomed grandchildren and eventually great-grandchildren, that love remained their foundation and greatest blessing. On warm summer evenings, well into their 70s, Quentin and Felicity could still be found sitting on the porch swing, hands clasped, watching the fireflies dance as they had on so many nights before. Sometimes they spoke of the day's events, sometimes of memories spanning decades, and sometimes they simply sat in comfortable silence, content in each other's presence. And if anyone had asked, Quentin would have told them that marrying Felicity Zimmerman was the wisest decision he'd ever made, though it hadn't been his mind that made it, but his heart, recognizing its match long before understanding why. From that first moment by the creek, when he'd found his daughter sleeping peacefully in the lap of a stranger, his heart had known what his mind would take time to accept, that sometimes love arrives in unexpected packages, and the greatest journeys don't always lead where we intend, but exactly where we need to be. For Felicity and Quentin Baxter, that journey led to a lifetime together, building a legacy of love that would endure long after them, a testament to a heart's wisdom and the power of recognizing, even in the most unlikely circumstances, the person meant to share your path.